Hello, my name is Andrew Brooks. Another presentation of nonlinear existentialism. Title of this presentation is Aristotle and Quantum Theory, and the subtitle is Eigenstates and Thought. This is probably one of the more important presentations where I'm trying to tie in my thoughts towards quantum theory as I gave in the vacuum potential presentation last year, and the ongoing ideas and thoughts that I presented for nonlinear existentialism. So first what I'm going to do is just present some ideas, some writing that was done by Aristotle in his Metaphysics, book 7, section 6 and 7. And I read these during the formulation of the theory, and they kind of helped me go through it, and later on I came up with the vacuum potential theory to try to tie nonlinear existentialism into the basic structure of reality, as it were. So that's going to be section 1 and 2, then going into luminiferous ether, the Michelson-Morley experiment, then going back to vacuum potential theory, the wave function collapsing, eigenstates and thoughts, and conclusion when I'm going to try to tie them together. So this passage basically, Aristotle, I've written in the entire thing and I won't read it, but basically it's coming up with the idea of what causes things to be in motion. And then he's tying together time and movement, which I believe that time is basically a result of movement within materials. And so he's coming up with the idea of what causes things to actually be in motion. And it seems to me when I read this passage and also written in full of the sections I think are important, and specifically that he gets in the idea of the unmoved mover. And basically I believe it and I interpret it as this energy force that is flowing through material and causing the material to be actually into motion. Whereas some theories have that the actual materials, atomic, subatomic, have some properties and such that causes them to continuously be in motion, which I find very difficult to understand, because basically you're saying that these materials have been in motion for, at the present, 4.5 billion plus years. So that would mean that they would have a basically infinite amount of power within an infinitely small area or material. So I've defined that. I've always had a little bit of trouble with understanding it. And so again, with Aristotle's quotes that are in section 1 and 2, just going with that belief that there has to be something that causes other things to be motivated. And if it's being motivated, that this thing is going to be like an internal energy source, which is continuous, where in the vacuum potential theory, the idea was that the energy source is not of the actual particular materials that are presented, the subatomic particles, are actually it's going to be a field that's moved through them and causes them themselves to be motivated, but also like nonlinear existentialism in a probabilistic fashion, because one is going to be nonlinear to the other one, whereas the motion, the force, the expanding force, that is this what drives everything else, is going to be the independent, and the materials which are being activated by this substratum, the subfield, is going to basically react to it. So way back when, one of the thoughts that were coming up with trying to formulate how light can propagate through a vacuum or through empty space, as it were, is luminiferous ether. Basically this field, this subfield, a field that was believed to be responsible for the propagation of light. And so it's hard to formulate this, but just thinking that this endless field that's that everything else is within, once it's been disturbed, let's say by a light beam, then the force goes in that direction. That's how light propagates through that. So to that extent, Michelson and Morley experiment of 1887, rather clever one, had set up a box, and what it did was trying to see if there was any interference. I'm not going to do a complete justice with this explanation, but the experiment was basically they had one beam of light go in one direction, and then at right angles to it, the split beam of light went the other direction and went back towards it. And the idea is that if there was anything in this space, if the luminiferous ether was there, that there would be, because it would be, the light beam would be interact with the different orientations, it would come back and there'd be some type of interference. But basically, there wasn't. They found an absence of the luminiferous ether. However, I would, when I read this one, I was always of the idea that there is more than one explanation. Either that the idea that the area that the light was propagating through had no subfield, or yeah, let's call it a subfield where the light energy was traveling through, that if there was nothing there whatsoever, yes, it would come back. There'd be no interference whatsoever, because there wouldn't be a difference in interaction between different orientations of the light going through this field. So the thing is that if there was nothing there, the orientation of the light, the split light going through it and coming back, wouldn't matter. However, there's also, and this is where the vacuum potential theory was in, that perhaps there is in the subfield a matrix of materials, and for vacuum potential theory, I was going with the idea of materials that were bound or not bound. That would be free material, free matter, and bound matter, and it's going to be in basically this matrix. But the thing is that that by itself, you would go, well, that would be very much, would cause a lot of interference, because this matrix that I've described beforehand is very heterogeneous. So it would lead to a lot of interference. But I would put forward with the idea that, like with thought, with the field that's being, well, the phenomena that's being suggested for thought, is that what about if it produced enough interference, enough instability, that the orientation wouldn't matter. So you would go from one end with the Michelson-Morley experiment, that there's nothing there. Vacuum potential theory would say, well, the same outcome that they saw, that no interference was generated, was that there was so much instability that was being produced that both orientations of light going out and coming back together would be destabilized at the same amount. The energy would be from the field, the subfield, onto the materials, not just light, but other materials. So the thing is that when they come back together, they both have reached a certain amount of instability, and no more, because if it's any more than that, then they would dissolve the situation, the reality of which we know would not coalesce as it presently is. So it's actually had a certain level of instability. Both sides of it reach that certain amount of instability, and when it comes back again, there appears to be nothing there, because they both have been subjected to the same amount of instability. So the vacuum potential theory, as I just say, is an unstable omnidirectional field consisting of attached and unattached matter which interacts with each other. So the field is there. It produces, it imbues energy into matter, allows matter to actually have the energy that the present theories come up with the idea that the matter itself, as we see it, is the one that has the energy and generates its own, independently depends its own particular specific characteristics. Whereas I would suggest through the vacuum potential theory that we have this subfield that goes through material and energizes it and gives it, allows it, it enacts it, it potentiates to an actual characteristics through being energized through the interaction. So that's going to be where it kind of like different. Before I go to that one, it's kind of important. Way to look at it is that formally, next slide we'll see what an eigenstate basically is for quantum theory, anything can happen based on probabilities. but the outcome is going to be generated through interacting in a situation where one is given a higher possibility occurs, and then we actually see it goes from in the quantum states that many things can occur, and when the classical is when a specific occurrence does happen. And what I've suggested for the vacuum potential theory is the reason why we have this probability, and again with thought, that it's an agitated, unstable, because there's a subfield, a nonlinear subfield that goes through it, nonlinear to the particles themselves. Thought slightly different, but the same basic idea is that, so an agitation occurs through an unknown independent field goes through it, agitates it, and when certain things arise through clustering, we have an outcome. So we'll just compare the two. Eigenstates, this one's going to be eigenstates and thought compared side by side, therefore became necessary to formulate clearly the difference between a state of something that is uncertain in the way just described, such as an electron in a probability cloud, and a state of something having a definite value, that would be classical. When an object can definitely be pinned down in some respect, it is said to possess an eigenstate. As stated above, when the waveform collapses because the position of the electron has been determined, the electron state becomes an eigenstate of position, meaning that its position has a known value, an eigenvalue of eigenstate of position. And this one's going to be from Wikipedia as before also. I thought they did a good job with presenting it. So again, when you're in the probability cloud, many different things occur. This is going to be in the quantum field, the idea of individual states where they're agitated in a certain amount, and we don't know which one's going to become the outcome, and that's going to not occur until there's a clustering or something occurring where some outcome is actually forced to occur. This, again, this is very important to understand. I think vacuum potential, vacuum potential theory and nonlinear existentialism thought, I believe, is very much the same way. So the instability that is produced by the frequency amplitude modulation in layer V1b, what it allows to do is it actually puts a probability field in a way within the mind, the brain, and so it's agitated. It depends on how much interference is being developed, and I have down here incongruency, interference, and stability. But the end product is instability. So the instability is that when you are actually a thought occurs, thought, and then when the pairing that's going to be occurring within the neurons that are being stimulated, when the highest energy, the highest amount of positive energy is being produced, then it collapses into a thought becoming actualized. I'm thinking all the time right now, but when a specific word and such seems within me to be the most appropriate because it reaches the highest amount of positive energy within myself, that word or thought is being actually actualized. So the way to think is that thought is a probability field, and then once you've got a specific word pattern developed actually being there, it's an actualized thought. So it's very much like the eigenstates. So you basically have a probability field in reality, and then once a waveform collapses, then you have a classical outcome, something that's, oh, there it is, we've actually, the probability of an event is actually hit 100%. Same thing for thought, very much an eigenstate as well. So you would have an agitation and instability being occurred because the modulation within the theoretical areas that I've talked about numerous times, for V1b and such, that you have the agitation being developed. And then when you've had an actual outcome being occurred with a probability of 100% of that actualized thought occurring to the individual, that was going to be actually as the one of the main attributes, points of the positive negative feedback loop, is that always positive being there. The brain is always looking for the highest amount of energy to be developed that can be maintained. So when the words and such, when the pattern is being developed, the probability field being produced by the V1B goes from uncertainty to a certainty when the pattern goes, oh, this elicits the highest amount of energy at that time. So the instability for thought would be to produce patterns with the highest amount of energy. So I think it's very, very interesting to have those side by side. And I think this is a very good way of trying to have both together, trying to show how eigenstates and thought are the same thing. So again, it's a lot in a very short period of time, but I think it's kind of, again, interesting just to look at this. And really, I think it really ties into Aristotle very, very much so. I mean, I don't think in any way that perhaps he was kind of going with the idea of saying that the unmoved mover can, in a way, explain thought or the actualization of the thought. But I think that consistency, having something that drives the system forward without in itself being affected, because if what drives the system is affected, then you get more and more and more unstable. I think what it does is produces enough instability, and then the system itself starts to coalesce into certain outcomes. It collapses in its own way through the two. So quickly, perhaps the uncertainty evident in subatomic events and thinking is due to the interaction between dependent and independent processes. The independent process, that which is basically the unmoved mover for reality through vacuum potential theory, would be this subfield that moves through basically everything, but its orientation is not fixed. It moves all over the place, that you could basically look at let's say a room. I'm sitting in a room and I have these fields moving through me. And the reason why it doesn't become, I don't become, let's say, that my system with the particles which I exist of aren't collapsing down to a predictable outcome, is it because this probability, this field that's around me, this subfield that's around me, is moving all over time. Like let's say that we have a box within a box. One box, the bigger box, which everything else is in, that's moving around all the time. And then me to that box, I'm moving as well. So the thing is that it creates an enormous amount of instability, but not so much that the particles cannot coalesce. So this kind of thing is the reality we have right now, that this subfield, this independent subfield that's around us, is moving through us and giving us energy and such. And also I think it explains gravity, exertion of force at a distance. It causes us to be who we are. If there was more agitation, we wouldn't coalesce. If it was less agitation, we wouldn't be as we are. There has to be this like unique, special, required level of instability. So the instability that's produced in the subfield moving through us allows us to have the physical characteristics and such and exist as we are. And then through thought, we have the subfield that is produced by layer V1B. It causes a certain amount of agitation, and enough agitation. If there's too much agitation, the person would cease to function, probably would have certain mental illnesses. If it didn't have enough, then the individual wouldn't be able to actually bind their temporal experience. Yeah, I know this is a lot, but just something to start the process of thinking, because I think eigenstates, I've been looking for a long time to try to figure out how to bring vacuum potential theory in a more understandable way and connect it with nonlinear existentialism. And I think waveform collapse with eigenstates within the entire theater of the understanding of quantum mechanics, I think it actually brings them both together quite well. And again, the key concept is an independent field interacts with a dependent, or reacts to, because of that independent field, produces a certain amount of instability in the dependent field or process or phenomena that allows it to exist, to occur, and have enough, it imbues it with the characteristics which allows it to exist within a way that we understand it. So it allows reality to exist as we understand it right now with the idea of gravity, ability to affect things at a distance. It also allows it for the propagation of energy through space, and for thought, it allows for enough instability to be evident, not too much, not too little, to be present in order to allow us to be nonlinear with our reality, in order to allow us to have a certain amount of freedom from that reality. So a lot of information. Any questions? There's going to be a lot of it. But please think about this, think about it through, and just kind of see how the vacuum potential theory and nonlinear existentialism basically are different ways of looking at the same thing. The idea of maintaining a certain amount of instability for the characteristics of the reality of the situation, of phenomena, or the context to actually carry forward. Thank you very much for your time. Take care.